Hey there, and welcome to a brand new deep dive.
Hello, everyone.
If you're looking to boost your English listening skills, you have definitely landed in the right place today.
We hear that a lot, don't we? Listening is such a common hurdle.
It really is. And hey, if you haven't already, please take just a quick second to hit that subscribe button. We've got tons more coming your way to help you on your English journey.
Please do. It helps us keep creating this content for you.
Now, you know how it is understanding spoken English, especially when it's coming at you fast and furious. It can feel like a real challenge sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It's a goal so many learners share, and it can feel, well, pretty overwhelming at times.
Exactly. But today we're going to equip you with some serious strategies to tackle it head on.
That's right. Listening comprehension is such a foundational skill, isn't it? And it's often where learners feel the most stuck, I think.
Definitely. What's kind of funny is that the English we might spend ages learning from textbooks, it can feel miles away from just a casual chat between native speakers, you know?
That's so true. The rhythm, the speed, the vocabulary, it can be really different. Our goal today is sort of bridge that gap for you.
Precisely. And we've really dug into a wide range of sources for this one. We're not just pulling this out of thin air.
No, we've done our homework.
Yeah, we're talking expert insights from some brilliant English language educators on YouTube. You know, channels like English, Oxford Online English, J. Forrest English, and English Speaking Success. Really good stuff there.
Some really well-respected names in the field.
And we've also looked at practical, actionable advice from blog articles, places like Cursa and Inamar Aruta's website. They have some great tips.
Very hands-on advice.
Plus, we've even explored some findings from an academic journal. It's called The Influences of Using Podcasts on Improving English Listening Skills.
Getting into the research side of things, too.
Yep. And even tapped into the experiences and tips shared by actual language learners, you know, over on Reddit, real people sharing what worked for them.
That's great. It's a really rich collection of perspectives, isn't it? You get everything from the sort of theoretical underpinnings to the deeply practical everyday advice.
Totally.
And what stands out, I think, is how these different sources, even though they have varied approaches, they often converge on similar key strategies.
Yeah, you see the same themes popping up again and again.
It really reinforces the idea that we're looking at some fundamental aspects of language learning here. It's not just random tips.
Absolutely. So our mission today, essentially, is to take all that information, try to filter out the noise, maybe the overwhelm.
Cut through the clutter.
Exactly. And deliver the core, actionable insights that you, our listener, can start using, like right away, to become a more confident and effective English listener. We want to give you a clear path forward.
Sounds like a plan. Where should we start? What's the first hurdle?
Okay, so to kick things off, what are some of the initial, most common hurdles that English learners face when they're just trying to understand people speaking English?
Well, one of the first things that almost everyone mentions, and it comes up constantly, is just how quickly native speakers tend to talk.
Oh, yeah. The speed. It feels relentless sometimes.
It really can.
Yeah.
It could feel like a constant barrage of words. Yeah. And it's not just the speed itself, like words per minute.
Right.
But also the way that fast speech leads to all sorts of linguistic shortcuts, you could say.
Shortcuts? Like
what? Think about contractions, first off. Like I've instead of I have, or don't instead of do not.
Okay, yeah, those are everywhere.
They're so common that learners, if they're listening for the full two words, they can easily just miss them completely.
Right, those little time savers that native speakers use without even thinking about it, they can be real stumbling blocks if you're not expecting them.
Totally. And it's not just contractions, is it? You mentioned reduced forms earlier when we were prepping. What are some examples of those?
Yes, reduced forms. So these are when words kind of lose some of their sounds or syllables, often because they're unstressed in a sentence.
Like they get squished a bit.
Exactly. A classic example is want to, very often becoming wanna.
Oh, wanna. Yeah. You hear that all the time.
If you're listening carefully expecting to hear that crisp want to, then wanna might just sound like, well, like gibberish at first.
Yeah, or you might not even register it as want to.
Right. Similarly, going to frequently becomes gonna.
Yep. Another super common one.
These reductions happen all the time in casual, everyday speech. It's just how people talk.
It's like the language is constantly streamlining itself for efficiency, isn't it? Trying to get the message across with less effort.
That's a good way to put it. And I remember Emma from English gave a fantastic example of this exact thing.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
She pointed out how the question, what do you want to do? Nice and clear like that, can very easily morph into something that sounds more like, What do you wanna
Whoa, say that again?
do? What do you wanna do?
Wow. Okay, yeah. What do you want to do? Becomes what do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big change.
It's almost like 4 or 5 words have just melted together into one single sound chunk.
That's a perfect illustration of how individual words can become quite compressed and lose their distinct boundaries in rapid, natural speech. It's not neat little boxes like in writing.
Not at all. And J. Forrest English also sheds some light on this. He talks about how even in more formal speech, maybe like a presentation or something,
Right, not just super casual chat.
you'll still hear these reductions. He used the example of Barack Obama pronouncing to eliminate.
Okay.
Instead of a clear to, it sounded more like to eliminate.
Ah, so like a schwa sound, too.
Exactly, that very subtle, almost dropped to sound in to. Just a little to.
That's fascinating. So even at that level of formal speaking, these little changes, these reductions still occur. It's just natural.
It seems so.
Oh.
And J. Forrest also gave an example of how sounds can sometimes disappear altogether, right? Not just get reduced.
He did. He mentioned the phrase don't make sense.
Okay, don't make sense.
In fast everyday speech, he pointed out that the T at the end of don't,
Right.
And sometimes even the K sound in make, they can become so weak that they practically vanish.
So what does it sound like then?
It can sound more like don't make sense.
Don't make sense. Wow, okay. The T is gone. The K is almost gone.
Exactly. And for someone who's listening really hard for those distinct sounds, maybe expecting that clear T and K, it can be really confusing. You're waiting for a sound that just isn't there.
Yeah. It's no wonder it feels like you're missing chunks of what's being said sometimes. You literally are missing sounds you expect to hear.
Precisely.
So, given that this fast, reduced speech is such a common challenge, probably the number one challenge for many, what are some concrete things that you, our listener, can actually do to start getting a better handle on it? Where do you even begin?
Well, the Cursa article offers some really practical starting points, which is great. They emphasize the importance of initially exposing yourself to English that's spoken at a slower, maybe more deliberate pace.
Okay, so don't just jump into listening to auctioneers or something.
Probably not. Think about materials like audiobooks, especially those read very clearly.
Right, like professional narrators.
Exactly. Or news programs where the anchors tend to speak in a more measured, clear way. They're trained for clarity.
Okay.
The goal here is really to train your ear first to recognize individual sounds and the basic rhythm of English without the added complexity of super rapid delivery.
That makes total sense. It's like learning to swim.
Yeah,
You don't jump into the deep end right away, do you?
exactly. You start in the shallow water where you can touch the bottom, get comfortable.
Built that foundation. Cursa also mentions leveraging technology, specifically podcast apps, right? Many of them have playback speed controls. That sounds incredibly useful.
Oh, absolutely. That's a game changer for learners. Starting at, say, 0.75x speed or maybe even half speed, 0.5x. That can make a huge difference in your ability to actually pick out individual words and understand the sentence structure when you're starting out.
And you're not distorting it too much. It still sounds relatively natural, just slower.
Right. And then, as your comprehension improves at that slower speed, you can gradually nudge the playback speed back up towards normal. Maybe go to 0.8x, then 0.9x, eventually back to 1x.
That's a great actionable tip. It puts you in control.
It's a fantastic way to incrementally challenge your listening skills at your own pace.
And Cursa also recommends something they call slow to fast exercises. What exactly does that entail? Is it just using the speed control?
It's a bit more structured. It involves actively practicing listening to the same piece of audio multiple times, but at different speeds.
Okay, so repetition is key here.
Yes. You might start by listening at a slower speed, maybe 0.75x, just to really understand the content, get the main ideas.
Okay, grasp the meaning first.
Then listen again at normal speed, 1x, see how much more you catch now that you know the content.
Right.
And then perhaps even push yourself a little bit by listening at a slightly faster speed, like 1.1x or 1.2x, if the app allows.
Oh, interesting. So you go slower, then normal, then faster.
Yeah, that cycle really trains your brain to become more adaptable to different speaking rates over time. It's like building that auditory flexibility, being able to adjust.
I like that auditory flexibility. Okay, so tackling the speed using slower materials, playback controls, slow to fast exercises, that's definitely a crucial first step.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned earlier how words can kind of melt together. That leads us nicely to another big challenge, doesn't it? This whole phenomenon of connected speech.
Yes, connected speech. It's so fundamental to how English actually sounds when spoken naturally. It's where words in a sentence aren't pronounced in isolation, like items in a list, with clear pauses between them.
Right, they don't sound like individual dictionary entries spoken one after another.
Not at all. Instead, they flow into each other. The sounds at the end of one word often link smoothly onto the sounds at the beginning of the next word.
Okay, can you give an example of that linking?
Sure. Think about an apple. We don't usually say an apple with a gap. We say an apple, linking the N sound to the A sound.
Ah, right. An apple. It becomes one smooth unit.
Exactly. And our earlier example of what do you want to do becoming what dio wanato is a prime example of how these connections, along with reductions, blur the lines between individual words.
It really is like the speaker is creating one long stream of sound, isn't it? And for a learner who's expecting distinct word boundaries, maybe because that's how they see words written down, it can be really disorienting. They're listening for gaps that aren't there.
Precisely. Learners might be focusing too hard on trying to hear each individual word as it would appear on, say, a vocabulary list.
Yeah.
But that's often just not how they sound in natural conversation due to connected speech.
So what can learners do about this? It seems like a really tricky aspect.
Oh, Cursa offers some very practical advice for dealing with connected speech specifically. One key suggestion is to start focusing on learning common phrases and expressions as whole chunks of language.
Chunks, like learning groups of words together.
Exactly. Instead of trying to dissect every single word in a common phrase like, how are you doing? Or nice to meet you, you learn the whole thing as a single unit of meaning and sound.
That's an interesting way to think about it. So you learn the overall sound shape of the phrase.
Precisely. Think about greetings like, how are you? Or common responses like, nice to meet you, not at all, see you later. Native speakers often pronounce these as very fluid units, almost like one long word sometimes.
Right, see you later.
Exactly. By learning these as chunks, you become less reliant on picking out each individual word and more attuned to the overall sound pattern and the meaning it conveys.
That's a really helpful way to approach it, almost like learning a familiar melody rather than trying to identify your individual musical note within it.
That's a great analogy. And Cursa also recommended a specific technique for getting used to connected speech, didn't they? Something called shadowing.
Ah, yes, shadowing. Tell us about that.
Yes, shadowing is a powerful technique, though it can feel a bit strange at first. It involves listening to a piece of audio, maybe a sentence or two at a time, and trying to repeat what you hear almost simultaneously.
So, talking along with the recording.
Pretty much, yeah. You're trying to mimic the speaker's rhythm, their intonation, their pronunciation, including how they connect words as closely as possible, just slightly behind them.
Wow, that sounds like it requires quite a bit of focus. You can't just passively listen.
Not at all. It's not just passive listening. You're actively engaging your mouth, your ears, and your brain all at the same time.
So you're trying to reproduce the sounds as you hear them.
Exactly. It's a very active way to train your auditory perception and your motor skills together. It really helps you to internalize the flow of connected speech and start to recognize those blended sounds more intuitively because you're trying to make them yourself.
That makes sense. By trying to replicate it, you understand it better. It sounds challenging, but potentially very effective.
It can be.
Yeah.
Start with short segments and maybe slower audio at first. Okay, so we've talked about the speed of speech and how words connect. What's another major factor that can make English listening challenging for learners?
Well, I think a big one that a lot of learners encounter, especially once they start listening to more varied sources, is the sheer variety of accents out there.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge one. English isn't just spoken in one or two places with one standard accent.
Far from it.
It's a global language, and even within a single country, like the UK or the US or Australia, you can have significant regional variations in how people speak. Vocabulary, pronunciation, even rhythm can change.
It's like you finally start to get comfortable understanding, say, a standard American accent from TV shows, and then you hear someone speaking with a strong Scottish accent, or an Irish accent, or maybe a Texan drawl, or someone from India or Singapore, and it feels like you're starting all over again.
Exactly. It can be really jarring. And Emma, from English, really emphasizes the importance of actively seeking out exposure to this diversity of accents.
So don't just stick to one type.
No, she suggests making a conscious effort to listen to speakers with different accents and also different vocal qualities. higher voices, lower voices, faster speakers, slower speakers within those accents.
Okay, variety is key.
And she also highlights the importance of listening in various contexts. Not just crystal clear one-on-one conversations like you might get in a language lesson.
Right, the ideal scenario.
But also situations where there might be background noise, like in a cafe or multiple people speaking, maybe interrupting each other. Real-world listening is messy.
That makes perfect sense. The real world isn't a perfectly soundproof recording studio, is it? So you need to train your ear to cope with different audio environments and different ways of speaking.
Precisely. Emma also mentioned something about pushing your comfort zone when it comes to accents, didn't she? What was that?
Yes, she specifically advises actively seeking out speakers with accents that you personally find challenging.
Ooh, leaning into the difficulty.
Yeah. It might feel a bit difficult or even frustrating at first, she acknowledges that, but the more you expose yourself, even for short periods, to those unfamiliar sounds and rhythms, the more your brain will actually start to adapt and recognize the patterns within that accent. It's about desensitizing yourself to the unfamiliar, making it familiar over time.
It's like building resilience for your ears, isn't it? Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable initially.
Exactly. And it's interesting, that our Reddit source mentioned the Easy Spanish podcast as a valuable resource specifically because it helps learners hear different Spanish accents.
Yeah, I can remember that.
The underlying point there, obviously, is that finding similar resources for English, whether it's podcasts or YouTube channels or other audio content that intentionally feature speakers from various English-speaking regions would be incredibly beneficial for English learners, too.
Precisely. Yeah. Look for shows that have guests from different countries or hosts with different backgrounds. And the academic research we looked at, that article, The Influences of Using Podcasts on Improving English Listening Skills, it also underscores this point.
How so?
Well, it notes that podcasts, just by their very nature, often feature a range of speakers with different accents and speech patterns, maybe through interviews or co-hosts. So actively choosing podcasts with diverse voices can be a very effective and often quite enjoyable strategy for broadening your accent comprehension.
That's a great tip. Use the medium itself to get that variety. Okay, so we've tackled fast speech, connected speech, and the challenge of unfamiliar accents. What's another fundamental hurdle that learners often face? Something maybe a bit more basic.
A really basic but absolutely crucial factor is the size of your vocabulary.
Ah, yes. Words. You need to know the words.
Exactly. Even if someone is speaking slowly and clearly with perfect pronunciation, if you simply don't know the meaning of the key words they're using, understanding is going to be a significant struggle, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems obvious when you say it, but it's easy sometimes to focus so much on the sounds, the pronunciation, the speed, that you kind of overlook the importance of just knowing more words.
Definitely. It's like trying to follow a conversation in a code where you only know half the symbols. You can't piece it together.
So what's the advice here? Just learn more words.
Pretty much, but strategically. Cursor rightly points out that actively expanding your vocabulary is a continuous and essential part of improving your listening comprehension. It's not a one-time thing.
Right, it's ongoing.
They recommend a multi-pronged approach that includes regular reading, which exposes you to words in context.
Okay.
Active listening, where you pay attention to new words you hear, and even strategically using subtitles when you're watching videos or movies.
Subtitles can be helpful then. Some people worry they become a crutch.
They can be, if used well. The idea is, when you encounter new words, whether reading or listening with subtitles, you make the effort to look them up, understand their meaning and context, and maybe review them later.
Okay, so it's about being active with the new vocabulary you encounter.
Exactly. And they also suggested utilizing vocabulary building apps, things like Anki or Quizlet, which use spaced repetition systems, or SRS.
Ah, SRS apps. Those are great for memorization.
They're fantastic for helping you to learn and, crucially, remember new words efficiently over time. It's all about consistent effort to grow your mental dictionary.
Makes sense.
Because the more words you have in your working vocabulary, the more context you'll have when you're listening. And actually, the easier it will become to infer the meaning of unfamiliar words just based on the surrounding language you do know.
Right. A strong vocabulary acts as a kind of foundation, doesn't it? It supports everything else in listening comprehension.
Absolutely. It gives you more pieces of the puzzle to work with.
Okay. Now, beyond just understanding individual words, there's another layer to grasping what people are really saying, isn't there? It's about understanding the nuances, the sort of less literal aspects of language.
Yes, absolutely. And that brings us neatly to the challenge of understanding idioms and slang.
Ah, the fun stuff. And the tricky stuff.
Definitely both. Native speakers frequently use expressions that aren't typically taught in formal English classes, or at least not emphasized. Phrases like, well, the classic, "It's raining cats and dogs."
Meaning it's raining really heavily, not that animals are falling from the sky.
Exactly. Or maybe "to break the ice," meaning to start a conversation in a social situation, make people feel comfortable.
Or bite the bullet, meaning face a difficult situation.
Right. These are the kinds of expressions that can be really confusing for learners because their literal meaning is completely different from what the speaker actually intends to convey.
Yeah, if you try to translate raining cats and dogs literally, it makes absolutely no sense.
None at all. So Cursa advises learners to actively seek out and learn these kinds of expressions, but importantly, within their natural context.
So not just memorizing lists of idioms.
Probably not the most effective way. Instead, they suggest watching English language TV shows and movies, listening to podcasts where native speakers are just chatting naturally using everyday informal language.
Okay, so immersion again?
Yes. These are great ways to encounter idioms and slang in action and start to understand how they're actually used, who uses them, and in what kind of situations.
That makes sense. You get the context, the tone of voice, the situation. It helps you figure out the meaning. Cursa also mentioned that there are resources specifically dedicated to explaining common English idioms and slang, right? Like websites or books.
Definitely. There are plenty of dictionaries of idioms and slang, websites, YouTube channels that focus specifically on these. Those can be really valuable for more focused learning, maybe looking up something you heard and didn't understand.
Good to know. And J. Forrest English, I remember, even includes lessons that highlight idioms used by famous people in interviews or speeches.
Yeah, that's a great approach because it makes it more engaging and memorable, doesn't it? Seeing how real people, maybe people you recognize, use these expressions.
Totally. So understanding these more informal, figurative aspects of language can significantly improve your ability to follow natural, everyday conversations, not just the formal stuff.
Absolutely. It unlocks another layer of meaning.
Okay, wow. We're building up a pretty comprehensive list of challenges here. We've covered speed, connected speech, accents, vocabulary, and idiom slang. What's another key aspect, maybe something more technical about pronunciation, that can often trip up English listeners?
This next one is often overlooked, I think, but it is incredibly important for fluent listening comprehension. Understanding the weak forms of common words.
Weak forms. What exactly are weak forms?
Keith from English Speaking Success does a fantastic job of explaining this. He calls it one of the secrets of English pronunciation for listening. He points out that many very, very frequent words, small grammatical words, usually things like you, are, do, to, for, and the article a.
Okay, really common words.
Super common. They often have unstressed, reduced pronunciations when they occur within sentences. These reduced versions are what he calls weak forms, as opposed to their strong forms, which you might hear if you say the word in isolation or emphasize it.
Weak forms. That sounds like a crucial detail that a lot of learners might not be aware of. They might only know the strong form from their dictionary or vocabulary list.
Exactly. They might be listening for the strong form, but most of the time in natural speech, they're actually hearing the weak form.
Can you give some examples of how these weak forms sound compared to the stronger, more emphasized pronunciations? Let's take you.
Sure, so take the pronoun you. When it's stressed, like you did it, it's pronounced with a clear juza sound, long oo sound.
Okay, juice.
But in unstressed positions within a sentence, which is most of the time, it very often becomes the weak form, which sounds more like J, almost like ya or ye.
J. Much shorter, less distinct.
Right, so instead of saying you look great with a strong emphasis on you, it's much, much more common and natural to hear you look great. Joe's there great. The main stress falls on look and great, not you.
Ah, okay, I can definitely hear that difference now that you pointed out. Ah, look great. It almost sounds like the you is just gliding by really quickly.
Exactly. It's there, but it's not prominent.
What about the verb are? That's another really common one.
Good example. The strong form of are is chores, like in car. But the weak form is very often just the schwa sound.
Yeah.
That very neutral, unstressed vowel sound, like the A in about.
Just about, that's tiny.
It is. So a question like, are they here? If you say it naturally, it often sounds more like they hear.
They hear.
Wow, the emphasis is on they and here and the are Almost disappears into that soft little sound at the beginning.
Interesting. It's like these little grammatical function words become almost invisible sound-wise when they're not carrying the main meaning or stress of the sentence.
That's a perfect way to describe it. They're there for grammar, but not for primary meaning, so they get reduced.
What about the auxiliary verb do, like in questions?
Do follows a very similar pattern. Its strong form is do's with that long oo.
Do.
But the weak form is typically do with the schwa again. So a common question like, do you know? Very often sounds like,
sure.
Do I know? Again, the stress is on the main verb, know.
You know. Yeah, nobody really says, do you know, unless they're really emphasizing something.
Exactly. And the preposition to also has this strong-weak distinction. Strong form to, do. Weak form to, with a schwa. As you commonly hear in telling time, like, it's 5-2-2, 2-7-2-2. 2, not 5-2-2.
5-2-2. Okay, I'm really starting to hear how prevalent these weak forms are in everyday spoken English. It's constant.
It really is. Once you start listening for them, you hear them everywhere.
What about some other common words Keith mentioned, like for and the conjunction and?
Sure. Soar, with its strong pronunciation, schwar, like the number 4, often reduces to schwa, again, in unstressed context, like this is for youth, for you. Not for you.
Right. And the word and, which has a strong end pronunciation,
frequently becomes just tra plus n, or even just n, sometimes in connected speech, like in the classic phrase, fish on chips. Fish on chips.
Yeah, definitely not fish A-N-D chips.
Exactly. Even the indefinite article a, which can be pronounced strongly as e, like the letter a, usually becomes the weak schwa sound in its weak form, as in, I'm teacher. I'm a teacher.
I'm a teacher.
Wow, it's like there's this whole undercurrent of pronunciation happening with these super common words that you might not even be consciously registering if you're not tuned into it.
That's exactly it. It's like a hidden layer of sound. And Keith, from English Speaking Success, really emphasizes that while, yes, you should focus on the stressed content words, the nouns, the main verbs, the adjectives, the adverbs, to understand the main message.
Right, the meaning carriers.
Being aware of these unstressed weak forms, knowing they exist and roughly how they sound, can dramatically improve your overall listening comprehension.
How so? Why is just being aware so helpful? Because these weak form words appear incredibly frequently. Understanding their weak forms helps you to stop trying to hear every single syllable with equal clarity, which is exhausting and often impossible.
So you stop straining to hear the full form of to or for every time.
Exactly. Instead, you start to let those weak forms wash over you a bit, recognizing them for what they are, grammatical connectors, and focus your main attention on picking out the more emphasized content words, which, as you said, usually carry the core meaning of the sentence.
That makes so much sense. It's like the unstressed weak forms are the background music or maybe the connective tissue, and the stressed words are the main melody or the bones. You need both, but you focus differently.
That's a great analogy. Knowing about weak forms helps you filter the noise and focus on the signal.
Okay, we've definitely uncovered another really important piece of the listening puzzle there with weak forms. What's another challenge that English learners might encounter? Maybe something less about the sounds themselves.
Another area that can be surprisingly tricky is understanding cultural references.
Okay. Things outside the language itself.
Exactly. Native speakers often make casual allusions or references to aspects of their shared culture, things like specific holidays, popular sports or teams, well-known figures from entertainment or politics or history, maybe current events, brand names.
Right. Things that people in the know in that culture would just get immediately.
Precisely. And if you're not familiar with these references, it can make it difficult to fully grasp the meaning or the humor or the context of what's being said, even if you understand all the individual words grammatically.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. Trying to understand a joke that relies on knowing a specific local celebrity you've never heard of, or maybe a reference to a historical event that isn't taught in your country, that would be pretty challenging. You'd just miss the point.
Totally. You might understand the sentence structure, but the intended meaning is lost. Cursa suggests that learners should cultivate a sort of curiosity about English-speaking cultures.
Be interested in the context behind the language.
Yes, and actively engage with various forms of media from those cultures, watching films and TV shows, reading books or news websites from those countries. The more you immerse yourself, even passively, in the culture. The more these references will start to become familiar and make sense when you hear them pop up in conversation.
That makes sense. You start to build up that background knowledge.
Yeah.
And Jay Forrest English, I remember he actually included a clip of a joke in one of his lessons that hinged entirely on a cultural reference.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
It was about the widespread fame of Taylor Swift. The joke only landed if you understood just how famous she is in that cultural context.
Right. A perfect example.
Yeah.
So it highlights that listening comprehension isn't just about linguistic knowledge, is it? A certain level of cultural literacy also plays a really important role in being an effective listener in real-world situations.
Yeah, language doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Precisely. Language and culture are often deeply intertwined, and understanding the cultural context can provide crucial background knowledge that helps you interpret spoken English much more effectively.
Okay, good point. We're moving through a lot of these common challenges. What's another one that listeners might face? Maybe something more environmental?
A very practical challenge that many learners encounter, almost daily if they live in an English-speaking environment, is trying to listen effectively in places with background noise.
Oh, yeah. The real world is noisy.
It really is. Whether it's a busy coffee shop with clattering cups and other conversations, a crowded street with traffic noise, a noisy workplace, or even just trying to watch a video recording where the audio quality isn't great.
Right. Maybe there's wind noise or echo.
The presence of those other sounds can significantly interfere with your ability to focus on the specific spoken English you're trying to understand.
And that extra noise, that interference, it can make it so much harder to distinguish the speaker's voice clearly and pick out the individual words they're saying. It can be really tiring, actually.
Absolutely. It adds a layer of cognitive load. Your brain is working harder to filter things out. Cursa offers a helpful strategy for this, though.
What's that? Just avoid noisy places.
Haha, not quite. Actually, the opposite. They suggest intentionally practicing listening in environments with moderate levels of background noise.
Okay, so don't start in a rock concert, but maybe a cafe.
Exactly. Start with something manageable, maybe music playing softly or the hum of a fan, and gradually increase the complexity or loudness of the listening environment over time as you get more comfortable.
So you're training your brain to cope.
Yes. This helps your brain to develop the ability to filter out distractions more effectively and maintain focus on the target audio, even when there's other sound happening around you. It's like training your auditory attention muscle.
I like that auditory attention muscle. That's a good, realistic tip. You're preparing yourself for the less than perfect listening conditions you'll inevitably encounter in the real world.
Exactly. Build up that tolerance.
Okay, brilliant. Now, I think we've got one more common challenge on our list that our sources highlighted. What is it?
The final challenge that Cursa specifically points out, and it's more about the learner's approach than the language itself, is inconsistent practice.
The classic problem for learning any skill, right? Lack of consistency.
Precisely. Like any skill, whether it's playing a musical instrument, learning to code, or improving your fitness, improving your English listening abilities requires regular and consistent effort.
You can't just do it once in a while and expect big results.
Oh, exactly. If you only engage in focused listening practice sporadically, maybe you listen intently for an hour one weekend, but then do nothing for the next 2 weeks. You're just not going to see as much progress or retain as much as you would with a more regular routine. The brain needs that consistent input.
That makes perfect sense. You can't expect to become proficient at playing the piano if you only practice once in a blue moon, can you? Language learning is absolutely the same.
Totally. So Cursa emphasizes the importance of dedicating some time each day, if possible, to focused listening practice. And crucially, they point out it doesn't have to be hours and hours.
Right. Even short bursts can help.
Yes, even if it's just for 10, 15, or 20 minutes a day. The key is incorporating English listening into your daily routine somehow. Maybe listening to a podcast during your commute, like we mentioned.
Or while washing dishes.
Or watching a short English news bulletin, or a YouTube video during a coffee break. That consistent exposure and active engagement day after day are really key to building strong, durable listening skills over the long term. Little and often is awfully better than a lot, infrequently.
That's really encouraging, actually. It doesn't have to be this huge, daunting task every day. Just find those little pockets of time.
Exactly. Make it a habit.
Okay, so we've covered a really comprehensive range of challenges that English learners often face. We talked about fast speech, connected speech, those tricky, unfamiliar accents, having a limited vocabulary, understanding idioms and slang, recognizing those crucial weak forms, getting tripped up by cultural references, dealing with background noise, and finally, the impact of inconsistent practice.
That's quite a list. It might seem a bit daunting seeing it all laid out.
It might, but the good news, the really good news, is that our sources also offer a wealth of effective strategies and techniques to actually overcome these hurdles. It's not hopeless.
Not at all. There are concrete things learners can do.
Exactly. So let's now turn our attention to some of those solutions, starting with some specific active listening strategies that can make a real difference, especially in conversations.
Yes, that's a crucial shift in perspective, isn't it? Because, as the folks at Oxford Online English rightly point out, listening isn't just a passive act of letting sounds wash over you, like hearing the rain.
Right, it's not just hearing.
No. Effective listening, especially in a two-way conversation, requires active engagement from the listener. You have a role to play.
Active listening, okay, so it's more than just sitting there silently waiting for your turn to speak. What does active listening actually look like in a practical sense, according to Oxford Online English?
Well, one key aspect they highlight is the importance of giving feedback to the speaker while they're talking.
Feedback, like telling them if they're being clear.
Not necessarily criticism, more like using simple verbal cues and even nonverbal signals to show that you're paying attention and that you're understanding, or at least that you're trying to understand and following along.
Okay, so what kind of cues are we talking about?
Think about those little sounds and words we often make in conversation, almost subconsciously sometimes. Things like saying yeah, or oh yeah, okay, right, or making sounds like uh-huh.
Those little back-channeling noises. Yeah, I do that all the time without thinking. But Oxford Online English says they actually play a really significant role, don't they? They're not just meaningless filler.
Absolutely not. They emphasize that if you don't provide this kind of feedback, especially in a longer turn from the speaker, it can easily come across as though you're not understanding what's being said.
Or worse, that you're bored or not interested.
Exactly. Or that you've just mentally checked out. This lack of feedback can make it really difficult for the speaker to gauge your level of comprehension, and it can even discourage them from continuing or make the interaction feel awkward.
So a simple or a nod of your head can actually really go a long way in keeping a conversation flowing smoothly and, crucially, letting the speaker know that you're engaged and following along with them.
Precisely. It oils the wheels of the conversation.
What's another important element of active listening they mentioned?
Reacting emotionally appropriately, of course, to the content of what you're hearing is also a vital part of active listening. It shows you're processing the meaning, not just the words.
Okay, so not just understanding, but responding to the feeling behind it.
Exactly. If someone is sharing some exciting, happy news, a positive verbal reaction like, wow, that's great or fantastic, accompanied by a smile, shows your engagement and empathy.
Right.
Conversely, if they're sharing something sad or difficult, just responding with a flat, unemotional might sound really cold or inappropriate, like you didn't grasp the significance.
Yeah, that would be pretty awkward.
So active listening involves responding with appropriate emotional cues, whether through words, tone of voice, or facial expressions that reflect your understanding of the speaker's message and their feelings about it.
That makes perfect sense. It's about showing that you're not just processing the words on a purely literal intellectual level, but that you're also understanding the emotional undertones and responding empathetically as a human being.
Exactly. It builds connection.
What else is involved in being an active listener? What if you don't understand?
Well, asking for clarification is another absolutely crucial component of active listening. Oxford Online English really stresses the importance of signaling immediately or very quickly when you haven't understood something.
Don't just nod and smile and hope it goes away.
Definitely not. They suggest using simple, direct questions or interjections like, what? Or perhaps a softer wah or ah, or even just, usually with a rising intonation, to clearly indicate that you need the speaker to repeat something or maybe rephrase it.
So it's much better to jump in and ask for clarification right away, in the moment when you're unsure.
Yes.
Rather than trying to pretend you understand, maybe nodding along, and then getting completely lost 5 minutes later in the conversation because you missed a key point.
Exactly. They explain that seeking prompt clarification is generally much more effective and, honestly, less awkward than trying to backtrack later in the conversation to something that was said a minute or two ago or even longer.
Yeah, trying to say, wait, what did you mean back when you were talking about? That can be difficult.
Right. The speaker is more likely to remember their exact phrasing and the context right in that moment, and they could address your confusion much more easily and efficiently right then and there.
And sometimes just that simple cue of, what? Or, huh, with that questioning tone is enough for the speaker to realize, oh, maybe I wasn't clear, and they'll automatically rephrase it or provide more context.
Often, yes. But Oxford Online English also suggests that if that simple cue isn't enough, or if you know what you didn't understand, it's helpful to be more specific about the lack of understanding, right?
Yes, they did mention that. So instead of just what, but you could say something more detailed.
Exactly. If a simple what doesn't elicit the clarification you need, they recommend using more specific phrases. For example, sorry, I didn't quite catch what you just said, or I don't fully get what you mean by that. Or maybe even if you're really lost, sorry, I think I missed that completely. Could you say it again? Or I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
Okay, being more explicit about the problem.
Yes. This provides the speaker with more information about where the breakdown in understanding occurred. Did you miss a word? Did you not understand a concept? This allows them to tailor their explanation much more effectively to help you.
That's really helpful advice. So active listening is a really dynamic process, isn't it? It involves constantly showing engagement through feedback, reacting appropriately to the content, and very proactively seeking clarification whenever you need it. It's not passive at all.
Not in the slightest. It's interactive.
Now, Emma from English also talks about a specific technique that really encourages this kind of active, focused listening, doesn't she? Her listen and write method. That sounds intriguing.
She does, yes. It's her listen and write technique, and it's a really powerful way to actively engage with audio content and, crucially, pinpoint the specific areas where your understanding is breaking down. It helps you see what you're missing.
Okay, so how does it work? It sounds like dictation.
It's a bit more structured than simple dictation. It involves a clear 3-step process, usually with a short piece of audio, maybe 15-30 seconds long.
Right, short chunks.
First, step 1, you just listen to that short section of audio without writing anything down at all. Don't touch your pen.
Okay, just listen first. Why?
The initial goal is simply to get a general sense of the topic, the gist, the overall flow of the speech, maybe who is talking and what the situation is. Just orient yourself.
So try to absorb the sounds and get a basic understanding of the main idea without focusing intensely on the details or every single individual word at this initial stage.
Exactly. Just get the big picture.
Okay.
Then, step 2, you listen to the same section of audio again. But this time, you start making mental notes as you listen.
Mental notes. Not writing yet.
Not writing yet. You try to actively identify any specific words or phrases that you recognize, maybe keywords, and you start to mentally piece together what seem to be the key pieces of information being conveyed.
Okay, so this is a slightly more focused listening pass where you're actively trying to pick out familiar elements and maybe predict what's coming.
Right. You're warming up your understanding. And then, for the third step, you listen to the audio one more time, the same short clip again. And this time, you actually write down as much as you can possibly hear.
Okay, now the writing part.
Yes. And Emma emphasizes that you should pause the audio as often as you need to give yourself time to write. It's not a real-time transcription test. Pause after every few words if you need to.
That's good. Less pressure.
And she even suggests that at this stage, it can be really helpful to slow down the playback speed of the audio, using those controls we talked about earlier, if that makes it easier for you to catch more of the individual words and sounds.
So combining strategies. Use the speed control here if needed.
Absolutely. So it becomes a really detailed way of focusing your attention intensely on the audio and actively trying to decode what's being said, pretty much word by word or sound by sound.
Okay, so you listen and note mentally, then you listen and write, pausing and maybe slowing down. What happens after you've written down as much as you can?
Well, the process isn't quite over. Once you've written down everything you can understand, the next crucial part of the technique is to review what you wrote. Go back to the beginning of that audio segment, listen again, maybe at normal speed now, and compare it to your written text. Try to fill in the gaps.
So identify what you missed.
Exactly. She suggests looking at the words you did manage to write down and considering the surrounding context. Does grammar help? Does the topic help? Can you make an educated guess about what those missing words might logically be? Or what sounds you misheard?
So it involves analysis and correction too.
Precisely. This technique really forces you to pay incredibly close attention to the sounds, the connected speech, the weak forms, everything, and actively work to understand the spoken English. And the best part is, it helps you to identify very, very clearly what you are and are not hearing correctly. It makes the invisible problems visible.
That sounds like a really effective and methodical way to strengthen your listening muscle, like we said before, and become much more aware of the specific sounds and patterns you might be missing or misinterpreting. A bit time-consuming, maybe. but powerful.
Definitely powerful for focused practice.
Okay, let's move on now to another incredibly valuable tool that many, if not all, of our sources highlight for improving English listening skills. Podcasts themselves, like the one people are listening to right now.
Yes, absolutely. Podcasts are consistently identified across the board, from teacher blogs to academic research to learner forums, as a particularly beneficial resource for language learners.
Why is that? What makes podcasts so special for listening practice?
Well, the academic journal article we looked at, The Influences of Using Podcasts on Improving English Listening Skills, provides some really compelling reasons and even some data. One of the major advantages they point out is the sheer flexibility and convenience that podcasts offer.
Yeah, you can listen anywhere, right?
Literally anytime, anywhere pretty much. As long as you have a smartphone or another device and access to the internet, or if you've downloaded episodes in advance.
That's such a huge plus for busy learners, isn't it? You don't need to set aside special study time necessarily.
Exactly. You can seamlessly integrate listening practice into so many parts of your existing day. Your commute to work or school, your workout routine at the gym, even while you're taking care of household chores like cooking or cleaning.
Turning dead time into learning time.
Precisely. And as we've already discussed quite a bit, podcasts naturally expose you to a really broad spectrum of accents, natural speech patterns including connected speech and weak forms, and diverse vocabulary on countless topics. This exposure is essential for adapting to different ways of speaking in different contexts.
So they provide that variety we talked about needing.
They really do. And the study cited in that journal article found some pretty impressive results. They surveyed language students, and a significant majority, a remarkable 77%, believed that listening to podcasts had actively helped to improve their English listening skills.
Wow, over 3/4 felt it helped. That's huge.
It is. And even more impressively, over a third of them, 37%, reported experiencing a noticeable improvement in their comprehension as a direct result of regular podcast listening. So not just feeling it helped, but actually seeing results.
Those are really encouraging statistics. It really seems like dedicating regular time to listening to podcasts can yield tangible, measurable results for learners.
The evidence suggests so. The article also specifically mentioned that educational podcasts can be particularly effective for language learners.
Okay, why educational ones specifically?
Well, it makes sense because educational podcasts, especially those aimed at a general audience or sometimes even specifically at learners, are often designed with a focus on clarity. The speakers might speak a bit more deliberately, explain concepts clearly.
Right, structure is important.
And they may even incorporate specific pedagogical features to aid understanding, like summaries or vocabulary explanations, or ideally providing transcripts.
Transcripts are amazing for learners.
They really are. And our Reddit source actually mentioned a couple of podcasts for Spanish learners, Dreaming Spanish, and the Small Town Spanish Teacher podcast as examples of really engaging and accessible audio content for language acquisition.
Right, so what's the takeaway for English learners from that?
Well, the key takeaway there is that you could look for similar qualities in English language podcasts. Seek out content that is genuinely interesting to you that's crucial for motivation.
Gotta be interested, yeah.
Feature speakers who talk relatively clearly, at least to start with, and ideally provides transcripts if possible. Transcripts are such a fantastic support tool, allowing you to read along, check words you missed, study vocabulary afterwards.
So even if a podcast isn't explicitly designed for English language learners, like maybe a history podcast or a science show or just an interview show, if it features relatively clear speech, covers topics that genuinely interest you, and maybe even provides transcripts, which more and more are doing, it can still be an incredibly valuable resource for improving your listening skills.
Absolutely. In fact, sometimes listening to authentic content made for native speakers, but maybe on the clearer side, can be even better in the long run than things made only for learners, as long as it's comprehensible enough for you.
Right, because it's real language in use. It makes the practice feel less like homework and more like engaging with something you genuinely enjoy learning about.
Exactly. That intrinsic motivation is so important for sticking with it. Now, Keith, from English Speaking Success, introduces a really interesting and perhaps slightly counterintuitive idea related to podcast listening, doesn't he? He calls it meditation listening.
Meditation listening, that sounds relaxing. How does that work for language learning?
It is quite different from the active focused listening we've mostly been talking about. This isn't about actively trying to understand every single word that's being said or analyzing grammar or looking up vocabulary.
Okay, so what is it about then?
Instead, it's about creating a relaxed state of mind, maybe closing your eyes, and simply allowing the sounds of the English language, the rhythm, the intonation, the melody, the flow, to just wash over you, without any pressure to comprehend every detail.
So it's more about absorbing the overall sound and feel of the language.
Precisely. The primary focus is on getting a general sense of the rhythm, the stress patterns, the intonation contours, and the overall flow of spoken English. It's about tuning into the music of the language, you could say.
So it's more like passive immersion in the sound of English rather than active analytical listening where you're trying to extract meaning constantly. Almost like letting your ears just get used to the acoustic properties of the language.
Exactly. It's a way to build familiarity and comfort with the sounds and cadence of English without the potential stress or frustration that can sometimes come from trying really hard to understand every single word, especially if the content is a bit challenging.
That's interesting. So how would you use this? Just put on any podcast and zone out.
Keith suggests doing this for relatively short periods, maybe just a few minutes at a time. Find a quiet moment, put on some English audio, maybe something you find pleasant to listen to, perhaps even something you've listened to before, and just relax and hear the sounds, rather than actively listening for meaning. It's a way to gently acclimate your ear to the language.
That sounds like a really gentle and accessible way to build your initial comfort level and familiarity with the soundscape of spoken English, maybe reducing some anxiety around listening.
I think that's exactly the idea. Lower the pressure sometimes.
Okay, fantastic. Wow, we've covered a significant amount of ground today. We've looked at that whole range of common listening challenges. We've explored some really effective active listening strategies. And we've talked about the power of leveraging resources like podcasts in different ways for improvement.
We really packed a lot in.
So as we start to wrap things up, what are some final thoughts or maybe key pieces of encouragement that you'd like to share with our listeners who are on this journey to improve their English listening?
Well, I think it's really important to reiterate something the Cursa article emphasizes strongly. Improving your listening skills is a journey. It requires consistent practice, yes, but maybe above all, it requires patience with yourself.
Patience is key, isn't it? It's easy to get frustrated.
It really is. It's not something that you can expect to master overnight or even in a few weeks. There will almost certainly be plateaus, times when you feel like you're stuck or even going backwards. But persistence, just keeping going, is absolutely key.
Definitely a marathon, not a sprint, as the old saying goes. And thinking back through everything, Keith's secret of understanding weak forms, that seems like a particularly valuable, concrete insight to keep in mind, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a huge takeaway. Becoming more aware of those unstressed pronunciations of common function words can really unlock a new level of listening comprehension. It helps you parse the stream of speech more effectively.
It's about subtly shifting your auditory focus, like you said, and recognizing that not every word in a sentence carries the same weight or needs the same level of attention in terms of its pronunciation.
Exactly. And, J. Forrest English shared a really insightful piece of advice in one of his videos, originally from Taylor Swift, of all people.
Oh, yeah. What did Taylor Swift have to say about language learning?
Well, the quote was, "Cringe is unavoidable. You can't avoid it, so don't try to."
Cringe is unavoidable. How does that apply here?
Well, I think it's such a relevant message for language learning, especially speaking and listening. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, of not understanding everything perfectly at first, or of feeling a little awkward or embarrassed, cringy as you practice and interact.
I see. So embrace the awkwardness.
Yeah, it's all the natural and completely necessary part of the learning process. If you're not making some mistakes, you're probably not pushing yourself enough.
Right.
Don't let the fear of cringe stop you from trying.
I love that. Embrace the learning, even the moments that feel a bit clumsy or embarrassing. That's where the growth happens.
Exactly. And Jay Forrest also shared another great quote, this one from Oprah Winfrey. "There is no such thing as failure. Failure is just life trying to move us in another direction."
That's a powerful one, too.
Isn't it? It's such a positive and empowering way to look at the inevitable listening challenges you'll face, instead of viewing moments of misunderstanding or difficulty as failures.
Right, like I'm bad at listening.
See them as feedback. There are opportunities to maybe adjust your approach, try a different strategy, focus on a particular weakness, and essentially learn something new about the language or about your own learning process.
Reframing challenges as learning opportunities. That's a great mindset shift.
Definitely. And just going back quickly to our Reddit thread, remember that one user shared a really practical, actionable tip.
Which one was that?
Listening to content that you're already very familiar with in your native language, maybe TV shows or movies you've seen dozens of times, but switching the audio track to English, maybe keeping subtitles off or using English subtitles.
Ah, the rewatching strategy. How does that help listening specifically?
Well, because you already have a strong understanding of the plot, the characters, what's happening on screen, maybe even some of the dialogue. It significantly reduces the cognitive load.
Right, you're not trying to figure out the story and the language at the same time.
Exactly. It frees up your mental energy to focus much more specifically on the English language itself, hearing the pronunciation, picking up on vocabulary and sentence structures, noticing those idioms or weak forms, all within a context you already comprehend.
That's a brilliant strategy. You're basically using your existing knowledge as a scaffold, a support structure, to help you engage with the English audio more effectively.
Precisely. It can be a really comfortable and effective way to get more listening exposure.
Okay, great tip. So to try and summarize some of the key takeaways from our deep dive today, listeners should be aware of the common challenges like speed and connected speech and accents. They need to be active listeners engaging with the audio. They should definitely utilize valuable resources like podcasts, maybe using transcripts or speed controls strategically. They absolutely need to be patient and kind to themselves throughout this long process.
Crucial.
And they need to make consistent practice, even in small amounts, a regular part of their routine.
That sums it up beautifully. With that combination, understanding the hurdles, employing effective strategies, leveraging good resources, and maintaining a positive and persistent mindset, you absolutely can make significant and meaningful progress in your English listening skills. It's achievable.
Fantastic. Well, that brings us towards the end of our really in-depth exploration today into how to improve your English listening skills. Thank you so much for sharing all those insights.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating topic.
And a huge thank you to all of you for joining us for this deep dive. And just one final reminder, if you found this information helpful, if you got some value out of this discussion, and you want to continue leveling up your English, please do take just a moment right now to subscribe to the English Easy Here channel for more valuable language learning content coming your way.
We'd really appreciate it. And perhaps for a final thought to leave you all with today, we'd encourage you, our listeners, to choose just one or maybe two of the specific strategies or techniques we discussed today. Whichever ones really resonated with you or seemed most relevant to your current challenges.
Okay, pick one or two things.
And then actively try to implement them in your English listening practice throughout this coming week. Really make a conscious effort. And as you do, pay attention to any difference you notice, however small, in your comprehension, your confidence, or maybe just your awareness.
That's a great idea. Make it concrete.
And perhaps as part of that, you could even think about which specific accent or speaking style you currently find the most challenging, and then make a conscious effort this week to seek out some English content, a podcast, a YouTube video, anything that features that particular way of speaking. Lean into that challenge.
That's a fantastic and really actionable challenge for everyone listening. Put the theory into practice this week. Thanks so much again for being here.
Thanks for having me.